G'day, May 40 here, talking to Cameron Adair. I found him on YouTube interviewing Nathan Kaufness. I read about him interviewing Curtis Yarvin. He has a publication that grabbed my attention. It's called the California Review. You don't find many conservatives at Berkeley. Cameron, talk to me about the California Review. When did it start, and what's your role with the publication?
Hi, Luke. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah.
Yes, so maybe I could do like a history.
Sure.
It's kind of interesting. Back in the 50s, it was originally William F. Buckley who started the National Review. So it was like the Buckley Foundation started funding student nonprofit papers, and so historically over the years, you know, the NGOs that fund the papers, like the Buckley Foundation, became ISI, which then became the Collegiate Network, and they've been around for that long, for 70 years. And so, there's just a long history of I guess in like leadership and student publishing and conservative nonprofits on campuses that's attached to those NGOs. And so, like for example, Ann Coulter started the Dartmouth Review, or the Cornell Review, and Dinesh D'Souza started the Dartmouth Review, if I'm not mistaken, and then famously Peter Thiel founded the Stanford Review when they were at those respective schools. So the one at Cal dissolved in the wake of the 2017 riots here with Milo, and I think Ann Coulter got shouted down. The school canceled her speaking here, and of course there's fires and things, and the conservative orgs sued the school. And in the wake of all that madness, I guess 8 years ago now, the one little paper here died, so I brought it back.
So when did you bring it back?
Last fall.
And did you have previous publishing experience?
No, I worked in entertainment. I played in a band in LA before coming to Berkeley, before going back to school. And I had some podcasting experience. I had like an entertainment show that was that gave me some experience, but so in media, but not in publishing per se, or not in the nonprofit space at all. It's definitely not in any conservative capacity, political capacity.
So out of everything you've published, what are you most proud of?
Honestly, I think that we knocked it out of the park like last fall. Like I've gotten, the donors are hesitant. They can't, get involved to keep their nonprofit status. They have to not endorse, political things or coerce us in any way. But I mean, I really we kind of killed it. The numbers that we did with Yarvin and on social media, I was like, I think we did better, in a few months than some of these papers do in their entire lifetimes. So
was it the Curtis Yarvin event?
It was so cathartic. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The Yarvin, that was the big thing. Like I had done a bunch of stuff leading up to having a guest speaker, and that was going to be the, the grand finale of all the work last fall. And when those numbers were going up on YouTube over the Christmas break, it was really fun.
And what's your role with the publication?
Well, in what sense?
You're the founder, you're the editor, the publisher. What's your role? Primary writer?
Yeah, so basically everything. Um, I think it was a lot of social tension and you ethical tension and build up over 2 years that had to come out. And I was very, very unhappy here. And so, yeah, it was, I spent, not an insignificant amount, and not an insignificant amount of my own money to do a lot of it. The donors were really helpful, but yeah, I mean, it's been referred to as the Cameron Review.
And at what age did you realize that you were right wing?
Yeah, so I mean, it's been the last 4 or 5 years. I think that, I was living in Los Angeles. I was working in entertainment, and I had dropped out of art school to pursue music. And so I didn't really have any foundational education. And so I think like when I went back to school in my 30s, and I started learning a lot of philosophy, and um, it all just sort of tracked during, around the time that, they were, a lot of people had this experience with the racial reckoning and burning Minneapolis and Fauci and everything. It definitely, um, that's my timeline.
So, about 23 years ago, I embarked on a project of interviewing movie producers. And I interviewed about 120, and there was one who said something that I'll never forget. He was a relative of Jerry Bruckheimer. I think it was Randy Emmett. And when he was in college and he was studying film, he called Jerry, and Jerry gave it. He said, "I don't know whether I want to be an actor, a director, a producer, a writer." And Jerry said to him, "Life will tell you what you're good at." And so you're not 15, you're not 18, you're not a teen, you're not in your 20s. So what are some things that life has taught you that you're good at?
Yeah. I found out that I think I haven't, well, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and brag. Okay. I mean, I can be a little spurgy, which a little Asperger's-y. And, I mean, I mean, look, I know I have an innate ability with language. So I figured that out. Probably comes from my mom. And then I also have like this really strong sort of innate moral impulse. So if I perceive injustice, um, it I can get pretty vicious.
Would it
Um,
be easier to answer it by saying what you found you're not good at or not interested in?
Gosh, well, what was Jerry good at? Was he good at film?
Jerry Bruckheimer is great at
Storytelling.
producing movies,
Story.
telling
Yeah,
stories that appeal to a 100 IQ audience and making movies that earn billions of dollars. And he was able to navigate the world of drugs and sex and temptation in Hollywood without killing himself, unlike his producing partner, Don Simpson. So many people can't take drugs and huge amounts of promiscuous sex and enjoy fame without destroying themselves. Don
yeah,
Simpson, his partner, could not do that. Jack Nicholson is able to navigate a world of sex and drugs and excess, and it doesn't kill him. So Jerry's able to navigate worlds that would kill other people and produce entertainment that
yeah,
has earned over $1 billion. So that's what Jerry's
yeah.
good at.
Entertainment's it's ruthless. I was just down there visiting my old the band I played in, and the main artist. And you know, it's it's impressive that people can navigate that industry. But I would add to that, probably a strong, I rate high in introversion. So, maybe social things, it's gotten better as I've gotten older, but I think, I tend to be the guy who they really, I thrived during COVID, it was like the introvert's revenge. So,
Yeah.
um,
So you realized you weren't going to network your way to entertainment success. Is that a realization that you had?
yeah, yeah, I did okay, but um, uh, I find that like sometimes reading and writing or schoolwork it can be less abstract of an assignment. Um, so I benefit from the structure too.
So when you were in high school, what did people expect from you?
Oh gosh, nothing. I mean, I was just I wanted to be a musician. So, I went to Cal Arts. I was making conceptual art, and then dropped out, um, and started interning at recording studios, which led to, you know, um, and I think we have some similarities here, but I've had some experience with addiction, and uh, so eventually that sort of path, I feel like I peaked. I joined the Recording Academy, went to the Grammys, and I think it was the 40th annual. And then I was just so fed up with the struggle, went back to school. So, um, I'm sorry, I forgot exactly what you asked.
Well, I was asking you, what has life taught you about what you're good at? And I thought if that
Right.
doesn't come easily, then you can talk about how life has taught you things that you're not good at. So when life teaches you about what you're not good at, that points you in a direction just as much as when life shows you what you're good at. Either way, as long as you're not drugged, as long as you're not at war with reality, it should get you closer to where you will thrive.
Yeah, it's true. And a lot of times the things you're good at aren't the things that you want to be good at.
Right.
So, if I feel like I have a knack for ancient languages and metaphysics, it's not it's it's not a very popular thing. Most of the kids want to go to law school or investment banking or something, where there's more of a monetary payoff. But uh, I almost sometimes feel stuck the last few years with what I'm innately good at.
And what did your parents expect from you?
Um, well, they were, I was raised, I wasn't a lot of, I wasn't raised religious. I mean, I'm Italian Catholic, but my parents are lapsed Catholic, and I was raised, sort of vaguely California, vaguely Marxist and Democrat atheist, before I even knew what um, the details of what holds up those ideas. And so, my father really pushed music, so I learned violin from a really young age, and so I played competitively on the violin, chamber groups, and would tour and stuff as a child. And it was like uh, it was the only thing that I um, thought I was gonna do was play music, and I wasn't totally sure how, so I ended up in art school. So there wasn't a lot of structure. I see at Berkeley, coming back to competitive academics, these kids come from, a lot of times they're much more mature than I was, in my early 20s, and are not making the same mistakes I was. Um, so
So
there were
have you
not
had it? Go ahead.
there were not huge expectations for me. or my sister. Yeah.
So did you have a teacher who particularly influenced you, a boss, a mentor, a relative?
When I went back to school, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, there's one. There's you need at least one, especially at Cal. I mean, this place would grind you into dust. You need an ally, and mhm. Yeah, I had mentors in philosophy, um, and I can't really think of any. I mean, any in when I was working more in the music industry.
So how would you describe your worldview?
Well, I mean, big picture stuff like politics or religion. Um, sometimes I say with religion that like my body is a deist, but my mind is a Catholic. And then as far as politics, I like to say that I'm classically liberal until you leave me in a place like California, or I guess more specifically, the two blue hot zones in California, and then I become a bit of a post-liberal reactionary because of all the so uh, it's a lot. My worldview. I mean, that's an okay way to put it for me.
Well, there are many different versions of post-liberal reactionaries. So what
Hmm.
version are you?
Um, well, I don't think. I mean, look, before I was even familiar with like the contemporary right-wing ideas, I was learning sort of the ideas that hold up classical liberalism, like early modern empiricism, and like John Locke and Protestant Reformation ideas, and uh, all the stuff that went into the First Amendment, things like this. And so if you uh, and it became clear, and I know this is still kind of on the table in the academy in a very sort of facile way, but it becomes clear if you're thinking critically about what you're looking at in school, that this is a system's not perfect, and that um, there's all kinds of holes in it. In fact, we couldn't even shore the whole thing up in the first place. And so they show you, like Rawls and Nozick, and ways in which those kind of ethical systems that um, form the basis for our political systems, aren't airtight. And so then, as I started to learn more about this stuff, about there's well-established voices that contemporarily that are pointing some of this stuff out, pushing back on all the problems, um, like weird emergent phenomenon that are categorically harmful, that have come from these kind of early modern ideas, like the trans phenomenon. You know, it, it, I don't agree with everybody, but I know, I get it. Um, so I hope that answers your question. What kind of post-liberal am I? I mean,
Well, not really,
uh,
but let me press you more specifically. So one
sure. Am
key
I being too
reason,
vague?
yeah, one key reason I'm not a liberal, not a classical liberal, is that I don't
Uh,
believe people are primarily individuals. I believe that we are primarily members of an extended family, a tribe, a community, a nation, but we are not primarily individuals. We primarily get almost everything that we believe from our community. We get our hero system from our community, and we live as cogs in a tribe. We did not evolve to be individuals. We evolved to live within a tribe. So that would be one very strong distinction between myself and liberalism. So what's your attitude towards this individual versus tribe. I think this concept that people are primarily individuals is absurd. May have some useful benefits, and so I recognize it can have some cash flow, right? It can contribute in some ways, but to me it's absurd. But what's your perspective? Are we primarily individuals, or are we primarily members of tribes?
I think that this kind of thing, both are true. If you're thinking in really broad terms, and there is kind of a contradiction there, but I do think that, I mean, you as in your faith, in the sort of the Greek Enlightenment and around that time of the Pentateuch, and later in Christianity, that you see, and I say this sometimes almost sarcastically, but like, this is one of the greatest inventions that we've had as people is the sort of invention of the subject, and to be able to treat people as a sort of moral backstop, as ends rather than means. And it was sort of reinvented in a slightly different way in the Enlightenment. And I think that as far as establishing ethical systems, I tend to connect those two. That is something that you see in Genesis, and in Exodus, and definitely in Plato. Is the individual with a logos in their psyche, and that's the unit of analysis as far as ethics. And I'm not sure. I just find that really important, and so it's not everything, but I think it holds up a lot of our important doctrines. But it's not, but like I said, you can see it spin out of control in like we have.
So have you experienced life as part of a tight-knit group, community, tribe, church, anything where military, anything where you're primarily part of something much bigger than yourself?
I feel that way about Catholicism. And
so you've gone to mass every day?
No.
Okay, so you haven't experienced life in a high intensity in group identity then, or have you?
I'm not sure. I never thought about it in those terms.
Okay. I'm going to guess that you've had, yeah. I'm going to guess you haven't, because once you've experienced it, it's hard to forget. For example, for much of my life, I get a short twice a day, right, with the same people. It's a very intense in-group identity. Or other times, I was raised Seventh-day Adventist, I'd go to a Seventh-day Adventist day school, I'd go to Seventh-day Adventist church, or my friends were Seventh-day Adventists. I didn't have any friends. I didn't even have any acquaintances who weren't Seventh-day Adventists for the first 14 years of my life. So I have primarily known intense, high demanding in-group identity. And so it's a different way of life, and it's probably predisposed me to the non-individualist perspective. Another key area where I differ from the Enlightenment is that I don't believe that people are basically good. I tend to have quite a skeptical view of human nature, and I don't believe that if we just give people more freedom, that they're just going to blossom into more and more goodness. So what's your perspective on human nature?
Yeah, I tend to be more of the Hobbesian than well, I will say I do know about myself that I can be a contrarian. And so that, if someone tells me not to do something, I'll end up doing that. And so I think that maybe, stops me from, I also, and I saw, well, I'll answer your question. Give me 1 second. I also think that the way that I was raised in like a sort of psychological sense, I don't feel totally psychologically adapted to work with others, and I've worked on it over the years. And so I think that stops me from sort of group identity situations too,
Yeah.
where I, connecting help, in a healthy way to other people is something that I'm constantly having to work on. And then, so to your question, is that no, I definitely fall, more on the Hobbesian side than the Rousseauian side, which I think is kind of the conservative leaning answer, where human nature, the tragedy of the commons, right? It's like human nature is, it's not all Pocahontas and what have you.
Yeah, life without the Leviathan is nasty, brutish, and short.
Yeah, solitary, poor.
Yeah,
nasty, brutish, and short. Yeah, so I know a lot of people push beyond that. Yarvin is taking it, pre-Hobbesian monarchy, and you can go there too.
Another way I differ from liberalism is I don't find the concept of rights particularly useful, except in certain constructs. So if you can form a certain society where people believe in rights and that's just part of their worldview and that they share a kind of a universalist moral outlook, then I see that under these artificial constructions, this notion of inalienable rights can be quite useful. So you form a society of Englishmen, then this fictitious belief in men being born with inalienable rights can be quite useful, and all sorts of beliefs that are false can be quite useful. So I have no argument against the founding fathers in terms of the effect, but I think the idea that in truth that people are born with rights is absurd. What's your perspective on human rights and people being born with inalienable rights?
I didn't quite follow. So
do you believe people are born with inalienable rights? I think it's silly, but useful in some context. But I don't believe it. No. I think it's completely fictitious.
No, I think that this is one of the things where I get sticky about language, because people throw around these things like rights and liberty and freedom and duty, but they're actually meta ethical categories. I mean, rights is something. Rights are like based on like an empirical category. Like, so like your negative right, like the last sort of like when you start slicing things down in like a John Stuart Mill Lockean sort of way, you end up with what's the least we can do? The least we can do is a negative right to your freedom from interference. And so it has nothing to, I mean, like the way they built it out for the way whatever Locke built it out, it grants people that, but I don't think that. I think, definitely there's more to it than.
I mean, it's a simple question. I think, do you believe that people are born with inalienable rights, as the founding fathers propose? I think it's silly, but I'm just curious.
Well, like I wouldn't dash a baby on the rocks if I was trying to, colonize someone's country. Or maybe I would. I don't know. I don't. I think if they're born in this country, they do.
Right, as a fact of political arrangement in this country. But someone born in darkest Africa, are they born with certain inalienable rights?
No. I think the idea, like I was kind of getting at, is it's specific to the ethics that we sort of live by, that make up the air we breathe, and it's not given in any. Well, that's a tough question, and I don't know. I do think you're. It's almost like you're asking me, like, I don't know. You say inalienable rights. I hear life, liberty, property, the First Amendment, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. And those are books to me.
Right, they're
So
artificial constructs developed by a particular people at a particular time and space in history. They're not something that's God-given unless you want to make that leap of faith, and then we're moving into the realm of faith where discussion is pointless.
that's true. That's kind of what I was thinking. It's almost like you're asking me a question of faith because no, like I said before, I'm almost sarcastic when I say that these are things that we invented, even if it is, um, and it's entirely heretical. But even if it is a religion or a political doctrine, so yeah,
So another way that I stand outside the Enlightenment is that I believe that right and wrong, meaning and purpose are standards that exist outside of me. They're not just something that the individual can decide or create on his own. So do you think that morality is something that the individual decides on his own, or do you believe that there is some kind of standard of right and wrong that exists outside of the individual?
oh wow. See, I'm a realist, um, but I'm kind of like a provisional realist, I call it. So I mean, I do think that we have to sort of point the project in the direction of there being, I forget exactly how you put it, some kind of objective
Yeah,
morality.
there's an objective standard of that right and wrong exists outside of your
Okay.
brain. Right, they're out there, and so when you say you're
Realist.
a realist, you're saying that morality is real, and so I believe in it. Like there's an element of a leap of faith, but whatever is good and true and beautiful exists outside of my brain. It's not just something that I can decide and create on my own.
Yeah, but boy, have we tried to get there, and you can't get there, you know, which is I think a lot of times where religion comes in. But I do think that it's important not to balk at the idea.
Well, from an empirical basis, I think one could argue that it comes from your tribe. Right. So if you don't want to go to the realm of faith and theology, that there are standards of right and wrong, there are standards of how to live a life that I would think ideally one would get from one's extended family.
Yeah, yeah,
And that therefore exists outside of yourself. It's not just something that I can create on my own.
right. Yeah,
But the modern
I hear
liberal
you.
enlightened idea is that every individual can decide right and wrong on his own. That the individual in his buffered identity can strategically, autonomously direct his way through life, deciding meaning, purpose, right and wrong with his own thinking. And as a trad, as someone who's right wing, as someone with the porous identity, I think that's not how I see the world.
Yeah, and that's definitely one of the ways where, yeah, um,
So let's say
yeah,
there was a family. Let's say there was a family living next door to you that was engaged in completely consensual activity that you found heinous, but they were upright in all their public doings. Like to me, I would be horrified and I would feel polluted and diminished by what was going on, even though I couldn't see it and I couldn't hear it. I just know it's going on, and so because I feel affected by what's going on around me because my identity is porous, I am repelled and I am diminished, and so I don't believe that everyone can just do what they want and it doesn't affect me.
yeah, it's true. It's true. Yeah, no, I totally understand that perspective, and then um, to argue the other side. I mean, in that kind of morality, you end up um, in sort of um, in sort of well, in the way that I think about it, so like memetics and heuristics and things where you know um, if the moral unit isn't only the individual, then you get like Marxian conflict theory and um, like Girardian sort of like mimetic violence, where the tribe has to find a scapegoat and things like that. But uh,
So do you feel
Uh,
affected and diminished or exalted, or do you
I
sense that what's going on around you has a profound effect on you?
absolutely do. Yeah, I absolutely do. And, I never thought about it in those terms. I mean, and Berkeley's a great example of that
Right.
because I'm such an outlier here.
Yeah. So, for example, uh, let's say that there was a same-sex couple living next door to me, and they're wonderful, wonderful people. I would want to have the best possible relations with them that I could. I would never say to them anything negative or hostile about their relationship and their marriage, but I would feel simultaneously, while appreciative of all the wonderful things about them, the existence and legalization of same-sex marriage hurts me. It hurts me like a slap in the face and a punch in the stomach. It is, I experience it as urinating on what I find most sacred, which is heterosexual marriage between a man and a woman, monogamously raising children. And it is, I feel it as an abomination. Now, I feel zero desire to try to hurt people who believe in same-sex marriage. I'm not going out and being a jerk. I would want to have great relations with people who have a same-sex marriage partner. I wouldn't bully them, but it hurts me because I have a different hero system. I believe in heterosexual, monogamous, married couples raising kids. And so I'm just curious, does the existence of the legalization of same-sex marriage have no effect on you? Does it have a positive effect on you, a negative effect on you? How do you feel about that?
Oh, it's really interesting. I mean, it's yeah. Well, I think I spend the most time trying to figure out how to, make myself consistent with the things I believe in first. And so, um, I think part of me thinks, well, like, okay, it took a lot of, I say, it took 14 units of ancient Greek at Berkeley for me to come around to Catholicism, and so, um, eh, if uh, I almost, I wish that people would get educated and really think, beyond what's been handed to them, and I could end that, by saying, oh well, and make a decision for themselves, based on their own reason, that's protected by their rights to do what they want, say what they want. But also, maybe there's more to the question than that. Maybe so. I don't know. I mean, I figure someone like that, like I understand how like a trad Cath, or I have a lot of reverence and sympathy for like Latin Mass and these things, but like and the meaning of marriage, which is like uh I think set up in a way for fruitful reproduction of of humans and ultimately good. I'm not sure. I have a hard time with that. I also don't have a dog in the fight. I don't know anyone who really. It doesn't bother me that way. It did that way. But
So, are there any practices that are legal and consensual among adults that bother you? Diminish your happiness? Make you repelled? I'm not pushing it on you. I don't want you to feel bad. I'm not saying, hey, you should be feeling bad because of XYZ. I'm just trying to figure out your
no,
worldview.
I know. It's interesting. I don't think about it in those terms. I mean, I live, I think, especially in Berkeley, and I hate to admit it, with a lot of disgust. And it's more diffused than that. I don't really think of it in terms of rules. It's more just like shades. Everything has just become so predictable here, and So I don't really think of it in terms of rules, like in that sense.
So, what did you take away? How did you learn or grow? How were you affected by your discussion with Curtis Yarvin, your reading of Curtis Yarvin?
Well, I think. No, give me one moment. I'm beginning to think after. I mean, first of all, he's the nicest guy. He's the menchiest mold bug, and he and his wife were so kind. And um, yeah, after kind of being thrust into that world, I'm kind of figuring out now that a vote for Curtis isn't necessarily a vote for everything he wrote or everything he purports to believe in, but a lot of it is just a vote for somebody who's been pushed around by the left. And so I think, in a way, I was so defensive last fall because I mean it's an abusive place, Berkeley. It can be, and and so I think I really had my guard up to everybody. Um, but um, yeah, I, I think. Well, I met a mutual friend of his, um, separately from him, just out in the wild, and she told me some things that were like, oh, well, the way that it affected him when he got doxxed was like, deeply affecting. Like it ruined his personal life. He lost friends, and she was like, yeah, he's like, it was really upsetting. That really made me think it different because, I had been used to sort of years of, analyzing arguments and analyzing metaphysics and language. But I don't think it's really about that necessarily all the time. And so I think even recently, I began to think about um, Yarvin's work differently in that sense.
Wait, I don't understand. Give me some takeaways. How has he affected you?
Um, that I mean that sort of the behavior on the left can, if you're a sensitive young man, as they say, uh, I mean, it can just eat you alive. It can just be vicious and brutal, and it is. And um, uh, I think like my main criticism of Yarvin would be like, well, it's not philosophy, right? But maybe it doesn't. Maybe not everything has to be philosophy. So I
All
think
right, but
it's more like, can they stop uh, whoever they is? The you know, for me, it's the institution and the administration and professors and just the whole um, mob. Can they stop? Can they stop picking on people?
well, the answer is no, and I just think it's silly for Curtis or anyone else to think that they can be heroes on the cheap. Or they want to be heroes on the cheap. They think that they can be a hero and they won't have to pay a price. Of course, there's going to be a price, and it's just incredibly naive and silly and self-absorbed to think that they could say controversial things and build a big following and become heroic in their own mind, and there'd be no pushback. It just seems so childish.
So you're referring to what exactly?
If you push and become a public figure, there's going to be a push against you. That for every
Oh
action,
yeah,
there's a reaction. And this notion that you
yeah,
can say really edgy, controversial things and build a big following and become a big deal, and that there won't be any opposition, just is childish. Of course, if you're going to try to affect the world, the world's going to push back against you.
yeah. And being here, this is the side of me that I said if you put me in a place like Berkeley, Berkeley, I'll push back. It brings me a lot of joy. and it's exhausting, but it really does, to get reactions out of these people and to push. And um, Berkeley really hurt me, just like it really hurt Curtis. And part of the review was making sure that doesn't happen to anyone else.
But of course, it's going to happen to anyone else. If you want to become a public figure, you're going to get hurt. If you want to say things that aren't popular, you're going to get pushed back against. You can't protect people, or can you?
Yeah, yeah. I just mean like, well, honestly, I don't know exactly what happened to Curtis, but we got this a familiar result. Um, um, but yeah, if you put yourself out there, it's definitely an attack vector, and you have to be kind of um, you know autistic and not listen to what people are saying and be strong. I mean, I got so much discouragement starting the paper. Everyone, everyone around me, my whole sort of right wing social network here on campus everyone told me not to do it. It'll never last past the fall. The only people that stuck around came after the fact, and um, uh, so yeah, I have a lot of respect for him and the shit that he's taken.
So there's a independent scholar by the name of Michael Woodley who went and changed his name to Michael Woodley of Meany. He wanted to sound aristocratic, and he loved publishing on edgy topics. And then there was one mainstream media article about him, and he folded up shop and has never said a word since. He just completely crumbled. So I see it dozens of times. People embracing the right, wanting to go public with a right-wing contrarian perspective, and then as soon as there's the least pushback against them, they just realize they can't take it. And many people have the most noble of intentions, but they simply can't handle some opposition. They just can't handle the bumps. And there's a great story in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, where Avram and Sarah are childless, and Sarai tells Avram, go make a baby with my maidservant. And so Avram does what he's told, and then Sarah can't handle it, and she just makes life absolutely miserable for that maidservant. So people often have noble intentions, but then as soon as they encounter a little bit of pushback, they just collapse and fall apart. So how much pushback, how much opposition, how much scrutiny are you going to be able to handle without losing your mind?
What's the story again?
Well, there's a simple question. How much pushback, how much scrutiny, how much opposition can you handle without losing your mind?
I know. I just was clarifying what specific story in Genesis. I wish
in Genesis, Avram and Sarah
went past it quickly.
Avram and Sarah cannot have a baby, and so God tells them that you're going to have children, and so Sarah eventually tells Avram, "Go have a baby with my maidservant." And so Avram does what he's told. He goes, it's Genesis chapter 16. And so with Sarai's servant is Hagar. And so Avram makes her pregnant, and then Sarah loses her mind. She can't handle it, and she drives Hagar and her baby son out into the wilderness. I mean, she's absolutely vicious. So Avram did what he was told. Then Sarai loses her mind at Avram, at Hagar, and probably at herself as well. But it just embodies this all too common phenomenon, particularly on the right, where people have these noble intentions, but then as soon as there's a little bit of pushback, they just close up shop and go away with a whimper. So the question was, how much opposition, how much scrutiny, how much pushback can you handle without losing your mind?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's Mordor here. I think, the donor has been really encouraging because they've been doing this longer than I've been alive. I mean, and they very quietly give you opportunities, and they make it so it's almost like being okay. So like your social circle a lot of times on a campus uh, is through, and this is important for people that want to go into like competitive higher ed to know, is that a lot of your social circle is through leadership. So you need to join a student organization or start a student organization to keep your sanity. Um, and if you're conservative, there's a long tradition of like a support group, which means, uh, you know, a partner, whether you're a man or a woman. It could mean jobs. And I think if you, and then for that reason, a lot of conservative people get out of the academy. They go into law or the military, because it's the only way to get away from it. But um, I know at Cal, there is there is hope. There are other conservative students out there. I wouldn't say the same thing about the professorship at the undergraduate level, but if it weren't for leadership here, I would have lost my mind. I mean, I would have crashed. I wouldn't have made it. But ISI, they flew me to conferences, and Teal invited me to his house last February, and it was just like a total vote of confidence that makes you realize that there's a world outside of Mordor.
What
So
Mordor is that? What's that from? Is that Lord of the Rings?
I'm not a big Lord of the Rings nerd, but yeah, it's like
Okay.
the
Bad place.
big
What's
bad
ISI?
place.
What does that stand for?
So that's the big NGO that funds a lot of these student papers. The um, Intercollegiate Studies Institute.
Oh, okay. Intercollegiate Studies Institute. Okay.
So
Okay.
if you're a young, sort of ambitious, literate student on a college campus, um, send them an email. I've had people that Hayden is a good example. He sent us some of his writing from Cornell from across the country, and then some of the outreach people from ISI and the other um, conservative NGOs reached out to him and invited him to some of their events. So um, it's not easy. If you're the hardest part is that it hurts your transcripts and your recommendation letters. So like I was doing, it didn't, I didn't, for example, last summer I filed the Title IX because it just it was just too explicit, the harassment and discrimination that was happening in that class. And it became clear that it wasn't just a social thing, that it was actually affecting the things that matter, which is your transcript and your recommendation letters if you're trying to fight your way up in academics. And that's the disappointing part, because what you see behind that is that, white guys are the least educated, people in this country, in the world. I mean, and you're not welcome because of your race and your gender and your sexual preference in the academy. And I'm sorry, but it's true. I didn't
When
used to.
when you say you filed a Title IX, what does that mean?
So Title IX is like a harassment and like official harassment and discrimination complaint that I think was established to protect women. But of course, so there was a series of incidents that had obviously affected um, um, at least one exam I took. And so uh, it's just like an internal kind of lawsuit for, I think it's in workplaces too, for schools. And, you know, they pretty much dismissed it when they found out my race and my sexual preference and my gender.
So you're alleging discrimination on the basis of race and sexual orientation.
Oh yeah.
And how was the process? Did it fill you with light and love?
No, it's really black box. They don't even have an office, so they just do it over email, and then you get some kind of rejection after telling your story, but over email as a complainant, and uh, honestly, it was just too upsetting to keep pursuing. So that actually motivated me to start the nonprofit because I had to do some. I had to do something. It was just, yeah, it's not fair.
Yeah, starting the nonprofit seems like a much more productive use of your time and energy than filing a Title IX. Is that right?
Yeah, well, made the right decision then.
And what did you take away from your Nathan Coffness interview?
Oh, I like him. I like him a lot. Um, a lot of having a lot of having the guests on last fall wasn't about grilling them about philosophy or political science. It was more, and explicitly so, just platforming them. Um, Mostly, in part because I didn't have the time or energy to do everything, including a very thorough interview. So I was really happy to have him on. I like that he's tough. He's like he's got that like kind of New York toughness, which is much needed in the academy.
So you wrote on Twitter, while Nathan was scheduled to speak with the review prior to the recent public refutations by his interlocutor, BAP, Bronze Age pervert, I don't think you meant the word refutation. I thought you meant rejoinder. I mean, he didn't refute anything because Bronze Age pervert, I've forgotten the name of the real guy, has zero expertise in the area that he was opining on. I mean, surely you didn't mean to use the word refutation. You meant rebut. Rebut and refute are very different things. Refutation means that you've proven the other person wrong. Rebut is that you made an argument against him.
Sure. So Nathan had made some. Right, so BAP had written that paper about the dork right. That was a rejoinder to one of Nathan's published articles. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. But it certainly didn't refute it, right? Refute means to prove that the other party's wrong and incorrect. To rejoin or to rebut means to offer a dissenting point of view.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to find these kind of like Twitter fights to be fairly intellectually unserious. I don't even think I read the BAT paper. And I think I said when I was speaking with Nathan that he probably just likes you. So, I mean, I think he would do better in working on a second book than getting his kicks by attacking people on Twitter. I'd like to see a second book very much, actually.
So we usually have about 6 good hours a day when we can be mentally sharp and doing hard mental labor. So how do you spend your golden hours each day? How do you divide it up?
Well, I overworked myself. I didn't. So since this spring semester ended, I've been trying to learn how to relax and be outside.
and let myself feel stupid sometimes. So I didn't take a summer off for over 4 years. Last summer I was working like 80-hour weeks on campus and didn't have a summer. And so, this kind of stuff, it's bad for your mental health. It's bad for your physical health. And so I know that a lot is expected of me right now, as far as what to do after you finish a degree. And but
So you have 6 good hours
Yes.
a day where you can accomplish something intellectually, and you're saying you're not doing anything.
Well, it's an important question. I mean, it's, where to focus your attention is a really important question. And I'm I spend a lot of I spend a lot of time thinking about what to do next. Um, Having ostensibly finished at Cal, and it's a bit of a transition time for me. So I wrote some articles this spring, which were, you know, which was productive, and um, um, I listened to a lot of books. But as far as I'm still trying to get my footing. Every time a semester ends, it's like jumping out of a moving car. And I'm really at a point where not only did the semester end, but over 4 years of intensity uh, um, is coming to an end, at least for a while. So.
So 4 years of intensity. So divide that up for me. How did you spend the golden hours during your years of intensity? How did it divide up?
I mean, I learned a lot about myself going back to school, but I think having deadlines and having something to focus on was really helpful. I mean, I would, I mean, for example, I mean, uh, I think at my most productive and happiest, I would spend the entire day listening to lectures and watching lectures, and then um, and reading, and then every occasionally you spend 2 days writing a paper, and generally I would go skateboarding at night when I lived in LA, and spend time with my girlfriend. Um, but then, by the time I got to Cal, last summer particularly, they were working me so hard that you don't have time to do laundry, you don't have time to shave, you barely have time to eat, um, and it was literally, it was 80-hour weeks where you go to sleep reading, and then you wake up not getting enough sleep, and you start reading as soon as you wake up. And some of these classes are so intense that people don't make it. Um, I mean, last summer I did what's called the Greek workshop at Cal, which is in the there's two of these classes that have been around for um, I mean, I want to say 50 years, since the 60s or 70s. There's one at City University, New York, and there's one at here. And it's basically like special ops level academics where you do 10 units in 10 weeks. Um, of language, and a lot of people fly home after a week or two because they can't handle it. And so I read so much that I damaged my eye, and I had to get glasses. So it's a bit like it's it's a bit like you hear stories of people to get into investment banking or something, and they realize, like Peter Thiel says, they're as hard as they're trying to get in, they're trying just as hard to get out, because it's just so competitive and miserable.
Well, you mentioned 80-hour weeks, but you really can't do much more than 6 hours of intellectual labor a day. So what comprised your 80-hour weeks?
So this class, it was, I guess, 9 to 12 in class, and then lunch, and then 1 to 4, and then an hour of office hours. And then for that second section of lecture, you're supposed to spend twice as much time outside of class because of the unit hour requirements. And so, which is, I don't think, even possible. And so.
Okay, so you're doing like 6 hours outside of class in hard intellectual labor and about 6 hours a day inside class.
Yeah, I mean, so it becomes 2 a.m. and you start thinking, well, do I pass tomorrow's quiz, which is, there was one every day, or do I go to sleep? Like there would be a 10-minute breaks in the lecture, and there's people, sleeping with their head down on the desk. And I remember one woman, there was a PhD candidate from, I think, SF State in ancient, and she wasn't familiar with how rigorous it can be at a place like Cal. I remember the second exam, because there was an exam every week. She was just like, she walked to the front of the class and she just handed in her exam, and she muttered something like, "I know it's not right." And as she was leaving the classroom, she looked at me and she just had this look of like disbelief on her face. Like, how is this so hard? This is not, it's impossible that this is this hard. And I never saw her again. And there was like another girl in the Greek workshop who flew back to Georgetown because it's just too hard. So,
well, what percentage of people made it through?
Oh, I think, I mean, I don't know, probably 10 to 20% leave. I think by the end, there was like less than 15 people left.
And about 100 started.
Oh no, the other way around. Sorry. So probably. Yeah, I'd say probably like, I don't know. I would say 1 in 10, 2 in 10 leave.
So 90% of them make it.
In a class like Greek 15, they stick around. They didn't necessarily get an A.
Okay, so were you close to other people in the class? Was everyone similarly stressed as you? Were some people less stressed? Were there people who were exhibiting grace and calm and confidence, or was everyone harried and bullied down by the amount of work? What was going on with your classmates?
I don't know. I think a lot of people
yeah, you don't make friends, especially if you're straight and white. There was like a trans person in there and gay dude. I don't know if there were any. There was one young man from a seminary, um, and we're acquainted, but mostly here it's just it's kind of a squid game, with leadership as an exception.
I don't know what a
Uh,
squid game is. What's a squid
oh,
game?
I'm sorry. It was this. It's
It
um,
was a
like a
Netflix show, but so it's
yeah,
a brutal survival of the fittest. Is that?
yeah, brutal, almost arbitrary survival of the fittest. Um, it makes light of the fact that there's less of an emphasis on wisdom or knowledge or substantive uh, ideas than it is just tasks.
Ha-
Um,
Have you heard of something called Havrusa learning?
no, no, I'm sorry, no.
Okay, so that's a Jewish thing where you study with partners, but it's also when it goes to a secular school, it means that if you have the test answers or you're connected to people who have the test answers, that call it Havrusa learning when you're just cheating. So, how many of the students do you think had answers to the tests or knew what was coming? How prevalent is cheating at Berkeley?
I don't know that it's possible. I mean, with the advent of a chat GPT and stuff, they started doing in person. You have to take your exams by hand in person. Um,
So you don't think
so
some people knew the questions that were coming because they were
I don't
connected
think
to
it's
people who'd taken the class previously?
no. I think if someone took the class previously, at best case, they could point you in the right direction as far as resources. Like I remember I was very lucky for that class, get a specific software called Verbum, that is supposed to be a Bible reading software. So stuff like that, but or they sure you share notes. But I think mostly if you're just really good at following directions, like a lot of these kids, like a lot of them, these Chinese like kids, like they'll sit on during the lecture. I'm there taking notes by hand, or at least I started out for the first year doing that as I gave it up because they just sit there, they're on WeChat, like looking at pictures of food. It's always food on their laptops. And, then they'll look up and ask like some inane question to get their participation points. Then they'll go back to looking at pictures of Chinese food. And I think most of those kids get A's. If you have an opinion or like you read some, the material beforehand, so and you didn't have an anti-realist, anti-essentialist skeptic's view of it, that's where you get into trouble, and that's where you're going to be more work uh, for that woke professor than the little Chinese girl, and they're not going to like that.
But I mean, how do they get A's if they're not paying attention in class?
They just don't care. I think that you can just game it if you don't care. If you're just entirely mercenary, um, you can just sort of game it. Uh,
Yeah,
um,
there's a in the popular imagination, there's one group who's most focused on is this going to be on the test. So if you have a student who's just doing a ton of work because he simply loves the topic, overwhelmingly this is going to be a white man. For everyone else, it's just a careerist ticking boxes and just a mercenary approach to education.
yeah, and what sucks, and it's like the truth is, and it's not nice to say, but like if at least in philosophy for me, if the thing that's keeping, you know,
atlas, as it were. The thing that's keeping the Earth rotating on its axis is you need to leave a man alone with those books and leave him the fuck alone. And that's like the one thing they fail to do. They don't want us here. So
one thing that jumped out at me when I was at UCLA is that the white and Asian kids came in with like 4.3 GPAs, and the black and Latino kids on average had something like 3 GPA 3.0, and so they'd have to take the easiest majors. They weren't taking biochem and the like. What do you notice about the effect of affirmative action and how people who don't belong at Berkeley but are advanced through to Berkeley on the basis of affirmative action, how do they then navigate? Do they just focus on the easier classes where the professors are just going to pass them through no matter how poor their level of performance?
Yeah, I think at the undergraduate level, you can get away with it.
Is it stark? I mean, at UCLA, it was stark. There was like such a dramatic difference between white and Asian students and black and Latino students on average. Of course, there are exceptions, but overwhelmingly, when I would find out from a black and Latino student, they came in with just dramatic, more than like a 1 difference in GPA and in test scores, just hundreds of points different on average compared to the white and Asian students. Is it a stark differential at Berkeley?
Well, I don't know the other, I only know my friends' GPAs, but insofar as that's an accurate indicator of something.
I'm guessing there wouldn't be a lot of affirmative action students in philosophy.
Oh, no, there is. They actually blocked the California Review on social media, the Minorities in Philosophy program, which is actually connected. It's the same program as Philosophy Forum. So if you want to get ahead, make friends with the department chair, present your writing at a seminar or something, you have to go through the Minorities in Philosophy department. In fact, the American Philosophical Association is actively, Sally Hasslinger, one of these raging, bald-headed, barren women in the humanities departments. Like they actively are trying to, they state that they want to get the men out of philosophy, and so I think, I think that if you're a woman in philosophy, if you're a minority, you're going to have a much easier time.
If I was just thinking off the top of my head of the 100 most important philosophers, I can't think of anyone who would be a woman.
Right.
Am I missing some undiscovered genius?
Oh, that's because they've been subjugated.
Yeah, I mean, if I was to list the 100 most important economists, 100 most important philosophers, 100 most important psychologists, I'd be quite surprised if any of them were women. 100 most important rabbis, 100 most important theologians, 100 most important mathematicians, professors of physics, chemistry. I'd be very surprised if 1 out of 100 was a woman.
Well, whether that's a reflection of something innate, I think that it is. You could make a psychological argument. You could make but I'm a big fan of Christina Hoff Sommers, and gosh, what's her name?
It doesn't matter. Let me just move on. So I notice as just a social fact, women overwhelmingly color in the lines, right? They follow directions. They tell the teacher what the teacher wants to hear. Men tend to be much more adventurous, and so men are much more likely to get penalized, and they're much less likely to play the role of lapdog. Do you notice
Yeah.
these differences at Berkeley too?
Um, yeah, definitely. I think that, yeah, that they make it hard. It's hard to have an original opinion, um, and um, if you have one, it's really not looked on favorably. Um, I think Christina Hoff Sommers is a great contemporary woman philosopher, and um, actually, yeah, the statistics are that it's predominantly men who get the undergraduate degrees, um, but then of course there's just active discrimination. Most of the jobs go to women, and uh, most I'm kind of the opinion. I know Nathan kind of pushed back on this, but it seems like historically you have to go leave the academy to do anything that interesting. I mean, so um, yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot exactly what you asked.
That's okay. So much of education, formal education, is education in being educated. It's learning to tell back to the teacher what the teacher wants to hear. It's a socialization exercise. So how would you divide it up? So I would look at an elite university education as being at least just 1/3 is just pure socialization. And how would you assess it?
Yeah, it's interesting because I did find some merit. I don't think that reading on my own, I could have, it did provide something, but I do know that most of the material I already had either had an opinion about or had known something about beforehand. And for me, it was never about just answering things uncritically to reach an end, which might be um,
Well, some of it's playing the game, and some of it's real learning. So how would you assess? How would you divide it up?
interesting. I mean, I don't know. I think I really hit a sweet spot because half of the last the last 5 years were remote. So 2 years I spent just through Zoom, being left alone with the material, and so I did also feel like at Berkeley it's surprisingly less rigorous, at least um, than you would expect. Like for example, to get like even in STEM, to get a computer science degree, uh, to get an associate's, say from Los Angeles City College, you have to take a year of calculus, a year of physics, and at a place like Cal, you don't need any of that. You can get a minor in computer science um, uh, with much less rigor. And so I was kind of disappointed in the fact that it's another example of this. Yeah, that is just that there is kind of a baby city, you know, marching orders part to it, um, which I think is connected to the fact that a lot of the professorship and is hangs on prestige, and so if you get professors that are, they're fairly brittle intellectually. I mean, their main concern is publishing these really derivative and inane, unoriginal, papers that, um, and not so much, uh, a deep concern for the material or the students. So it goes into, the horrible prestige part of it, which shows itself in so many ways, and the overproduction, the elite overproduction part of it too, where it's like, um, it's just really missed the point in a lot of ways. I mean, a lot of these professors, they're so brittle that that they're, intellectually abusive. Like, even if you know more than them about something, they would, in academics where reputation is everything, and then, in the case where now that reputation is so flimsy that um, um, means so little. Uh, it can be a really intellectually just a horribly discouraging place, especially for original thought. Um,
So where do you think you might have some contributions to make in the field of philosophy?
well, that's actually kind of it's a sensitive question, because I really wanted to pursue to pursue it, but I was so discouraged. Um, um, but yeah, I guess in like the subdomains of ancient Greek and ancient philosophy and metaphysics, is really uh, what I enjoy the most. Um, so, um, but I'm learning now that even if I feel like I'm abandoning something, I don't think it's going to go away. I think if I check in later in life, it'll still be there.
You've mentioned having several mentors. What's some of the best advice that you've received?
I don't know. On the one hand, uh, you're talking about Jerry and Don Simpson, and it's like, well, if you're good with language and it makes you happy, if you love mathematics, you uh, do that. And that's kind of, I feel like there's some truth to that. But then there's the other side, which is like, uh, um, especially in competitive academics where everyone's looking for the higher earning path. And so I've gotten some good advice to both of those ends. Um, Teal, has been influential on me, and one professor here, uh, John Ferrari, um, has been encouraging in an otherwise discouraging place.
What
And
about Berkeley is discouraging?
well, sorry, hang me 1 second to collect my thoughts here. Yeah, I think if you I'm not sure if I'm going to put this perfectly, but obviously, if you're conservative minded, unfortunately, if you're the wrong race, gender, or sexual preference, if you have ideas that go against the status quo, it's just going to be, if not explicit harassment and discrimination, it's going to be death by 1,000 cuts, and it's horribly it can be horribly demoralizing, especially, I love philosophy, and I don't love Microsoft Excel that much, but so that's the way that it's discouraging for me, at least, is that there's something very disillusioning about what educated inquiry really means, even if let's see.
Okay, Cameron, I'm going to run off. Thanks for your time. Appreciate you talking to me.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. It was nice chatting with you. And I was wondering, do you know when I lived on Sunset Boulevard, do you know the Masons? They own the Circus of Books, which was like that. I just figured because of.
I don't think I know them. I love my books virtual. I actually prefer ebooks because it's easier to cut and paste bits that I want to comment on my blog.
Oh, well, there was a Jewish family in LA who famously owned this like sort of two porn bookshops in Silver Lake and on the West Side.
Oh, what were their full names?
Oh gosh. Barry and Karen Mason.
Yeah, I don't think I do, but that was 20 years ago that I wrote about that industry, so I don't remember everyone that I met. So, okay, Cameron, thanks. I'm going to move on and do a solo show for a little while. Take care, man.
Okay, thanks for your time.
Yep. Thanks, man. Okay, I want to.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Let's see. Okay, I want to play an excerpt here from Mark Halperin's interview with Joe Scarborough from this week.
We agree. Or what we have in common, and you annotate. First of all, the reason why I'm so excited about this conversation, the reason why I tell people this is unlike any conversation they've heard about a topic discussed ad nauseum for nearly a decade, is because I think you and I are in an unusual, if not unique, position. First of all, we both know Joe Biden pretty well, and we've known him for a long time.
I find it hard to believe these guys are friends. I find Mark Halperin so impressive, and I don't find Joe Scarborough remotely impressive.
Period of time. So we're not dealing with a two-dimensional figure when we talk about him. We're dealing with someone we've spoken to, right?
Right, exactly.
All right. Number two, we both.
And having spoken to someone, it can add a little bit of insight, but it hardly makes you the definitive word. I mean, obviously, Joe Scarborough is a big joke for his passionate comments. Was it 9 months ago about this is the best Biden ever? Right? Just because he spoke to Joe Biden. All right, you see what you want to see. All right, this is the bottom line. So Joe Scarborough says, this was the best Biden ever. And I don't believe him. He just saw what he wanted to see. We don't encounter the world as it is. We encounter the world as our filters present it to us. And it's just kind of weird when you've got someone who's, very impressive and someone who's so unimpressive. And here you go. Kind of blows my mind.
I believe that Joe Biden, to this day, has good days and bad days. And so the right-wing caricature that says he's weekend at Bernie's, not in charge of the government when he was president, is not true. And from the State of the Union address he gave.
And I never bought into someone else was the shadowy figure behind the scenes who was running the government, because pretty much all the major decisions of the Biden administration were completely in line with what you would expect from Joe Biden, who always placed himself in the center of the Democratic Party. When the Democratic Party moved left, Joe Biden moved left with it.
But the left-wing defense said, he's perfectly fine. Also not true. Then we're open to data on this, correct?
Right. Yeah, correct. And I'd love to get into that. I'd love to get into that a little bit more after you go through these initial bullet points, only because certain skills lend themselves to governing, certain skills still lend themselves to politics and running for president.
Look, there's no way you can say with a straight face that Joe Biden was equipped, was ready, was capable of running the United States government. It's a ludicrous joke to assert it in 2020, let alone in 2025. But this guy still asserts it because he saw what he wanted to see.
President. And there's a strong dividing line there on what he was capable of and not capable of.
We both want to get at the truth. Neither of us has a dog in the hunt where we say,
at his best, Joe Biden had about 6 hours a day, right, between about 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. There's no way that a serious person can say that was sufficient to run the government of the United States. This is just a ludicrous perspective from Joe Scarborough, worthy of contempt.
Oh, no, I don't want data that conflicts with my view that Biden can't think or Biden is perfect, right?
Right. And just so people know, as you're going...
Joe Scarborough only saw what he wanted to see, just like most people only see what they wanted to see. But his blinkered vision was so ridiculous that he deserves to be a figure of contempt.
Through all this, this is literally something that we have talked about, I think, every day since 2019. When one day I would express more concern, one day you would express more concern, and an ongoing debate going.
So from 2017, it was obvious that Joe Biden was senile. How much concern was Joe Scarborough expressing about Joe Biden's obvious senility from 2017 on? I don't remember him expressing much concern about Joe Biden's obvious incapacity, senility, mental unfitness, physical unfitness, did not deserve to be in the presidency because he simply wasn't up to the job.
Going into 2020, is he really going to run? Going all the way back and throughout 2022, 23, 24. Yeah, it is just so. So when you say we've talked about this isn't like once every 3 weeks. This has been a running obsession on the state of whether he's going to run, whether he's capable of running.
Right. And most people in the media or commentators, you look at them and you'd say, well, that person is dug in on the Biden's fine point of view, or that person's dug in the Biden is weekend at Bernie's point of view.
Yeah.
And I can tell everybody from the conversations that you and I have had, we're not in those camps. We're in the let's figure out what's going on school, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you're going to play, I'm sure, the Biden at its best clip in a little bit. That came after I spent 2.5, 3 hours with him. So, yeah, so much of it is based on observation. And then, of course, you see a debate and you're like, well, no, maybe not. So, yeah, but you're right, though. But it would sort of go back and forth between us over the past 5, 6 years on this.
Right. Now, I'm going to tell my story briefly and my narrative starting in 2017 through the present day. And then I want to hear yours about how you connected to this question. All right. So 2017, I've told this story before. I saw Joe Biden do a book tour event. The moderator was Atul Gawande, a doctor, a very friendly guy. Joe Biden speaking to a big auditorium. And it was a disaster. And it was exactly what we saw later. He was glassy-eyed, had trouble following the conversation. I can't find video of that event anywhere on the internet. I'm a little suspicious about that. Elsewhere, though, on that tour, because I went and looked at the book tour again, 2017, he was fine. Again, good days and bad days. But the bad day that I saw, and it was an evening event, made me worried and say, he's never going to run for anything ever again. He's got a big problem. You didn't see anything till 2019, correct?
Yeah, I will say also, I think in 2017, well, I'll tell you, I had talked about Bo's death on the show and had talked about that extraordinary speech that Bobby Kennedy gave after the death of Martin Luther King. And he talked about the awful grace of God. And I spoke about Bo that way, the awful grace of God, drip by drip, until we understand actually the mercy. And he called me then, and I thought back on it a good bit. I really do think so. If you're talking about 2017 book events, so I think those really good and really bad days.
So Mark Halperin saw clear as day that by 2017 that Joe Biden was significantly checked out, was just mentally not up to the job, just glassy-eyed, just not simply mentally competent because of an evening discussion with a very friendly host. But Joe Biden was checked out, was just not up to the job because it didn't happen between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. So why was Mark Halperin able to see the bleedingly obvious and Joe Scarborough still couldn't see it in 2024? Because of the force of desire, right? We see what we want to see.
Certainly accelerated after the death of Beau Biden. And I suspect also, Hunter also, this was Mika's operating theory during the campaign, Hunter's conviction and all of those problems also just, again, had a profound impact on him. I think 2019 was the first time I called you and said, I'm not sure if this guy is going to run. And when...
So if you know people, this is why it's good to have friends and community. Other people will consistently see things that you don't see, right? There are huge blind spots in the way that I see the world, right? My desires blind me from much of reality. But if you have people in your life, if you have community in your life, all right, then you'll get information about your blind spots. If you're largely an individual walking largely alone through life, you won't get this necessary feedback. Right? There were so many people who were there to tell you about what was really going on. It's just ludicrous that Joe Scarborough...
Into jelly. As Jake Tapper makes the rounds promoting his book on what's left of Biden's brain, Megyn Kelly was having none of it. She ripped him a new one for failing to question Joe on his acuity, despite having opportunities to do so. Roll it, Nora.
You didn't follow up on the fact that he was falling up the stairs, that he was losing his train of thought regularly, that he was slurring, that he was incomprehensible, that he was getting lost on the White House lawn. You sat right across from him and you asked none of that.
That's the important thing. Now, this author guy, the CNN host, Jake Tapper, he says, he feels very humble and bad. But his publicist, his publisher were promoting him as a brave truth seeker all along, right? It's only when that fake persona, right, didn't cut it, and he became such an object of ridicule. Now, Jake Tapper, with the help of some emergency publicity guidance, right, is now taking the humble route.
True, but I did ask him about his age and the fact that the American people had concluded that even though he said whenever anybody brought up the subject of his age, watch me. And I said, yes, they're watching you and they are concerned that you were too old for this job.
There is a way of pressing a man like that on the actual infirmities to bring it home to him and to the audience. And
Jake Tapper pressed the points he wanted to press, and he sucked on the points that he wanted to suck. Right? This reflects his view of the world. Right? He was blind to the bleedingly obvious, just like Joe Scarborough. And he would be able to get away with it, except that people have the goods on how deceitful he's been and how unimpressive he's been. And so when other people have the goods on you, then it pays, with the help of good publicists, to adopt the humble attitude that he is only now taking because no other attitude is possible for him. Right? He had to be beaten into this humble attitude.
You didn't do it.
That's correct. I didn't.
Ouch. I guess that's we should applaud him for admitting that he sucks at his job. I don't know. More, please.
You covered the Biden presidency aggressively throughout the 4 years, and you didn't cover mental acuity hardly at all. I mean, time and time again, when issues came up, you seem to be running cover for the...
Mental acuity is such an unnatural term. It is so inhuman to describe a reality like senile. Right? Senile is a normal word to describe Joe Biden's condition, but saying the word senile and saying the president's senile, that would place you outside of polite society. So you cannot accurately describe reality without saying things that are politically incorrect and getting you exiled from elite circles, from becoming a traitor to your social class and to your university. Right? To tell the bleedingly obvious requires often tremendous courage and an unwillingness to bow to the canons of political correctness.
President.
I don't
you didn't
think
seem
that's
interested
true.
With the current White House. I have some connections. With the Joe Biden White House, I had none. But you did. You did. And so while you've been in Washington 30 years, Jake, you guys, you and CNN have White House connections, but there was no effort, none, to get to the bottom of this. And now for you guys to write this book, like, there was a cover-up. It's like there was a cover-up and there was an attempted cover-up. It could only ever work if you allowed it.
Wow, I haven't seen a man get beaten like that since I convinced Kilmeade to try on Dana Perino's culottes. Madison, that was pretty harsh. I kind of give Jake credit for going on because he knew that was going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, he had to. He's been doing so much friendly press. He is all over the place, and everyone's kind of like, oh, good try, buddy. You tried to cover it. And he's like, I know, and now I have this book. And she finally had the balls to say, that's not enough.
Yeah.
You were there. You had the connections. Mm-hmm. I guess we could give him credit, but we're already going to give him a ton of money and credit for covering a presidency, which he's now making money off of, saying, I didn't do a good job.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
Maybe we shouldn't give him credit for this.
There's nothing wrong with him making money. This is like the weakest argument that I hear all the time. Oh, he's making money. He worked really hard. He's a good writer. He's skilled. And he's got a product that people want to buy. People should not begrudge him for making money. And they should simultaneously have contempt for the way that he and Joe Scarborough and virtually the entire mainstream media did not report on the bleedingly obvious. And Joe Scarborough is so incredibly unimpressive in the way that he talks about this.
And I think we agreed on that based on some observations.
Yeah, we both had direct and indirect experiences with him in 2019 that made us think, boy, it just doesn't seem like he's got the focus to do it because he has some bad days. We also both had the experience that he had plenty of good days. This is an event that got written about by a Wall Street Journal columnist. I wasn't at this event, but once it occurred, I heard from a bunch of people. This is Joe Biden in 2020 as a presidential candidate in South Carolina.
My name's Joe Biden. I'm a Democratic candidate for the United States Senate. Look me over. If you like what you see, help out. If not, vote for the other guy. Give me a look, though, okay? That's all I've really got to say to you. I got 2 minutes and 30 seconds left. I'm looking at the clock down here.
So he said he's running for Senate, and he said don't vote for the other Biden. We all know that part of the defense of the pro-Biden people was, oh, he's always had malapropisms. He's always speaking in a certain way. But I looked at that tape and other events in that cycle.
The idea this is the best Biden ever and this is something impressive is ridiculous. Joe Biden has always been a blowhard. The first time I started reading the New Republic, was when I just discovered an essay by Brit Hume in the fall of, I believe, 1995, and it was a New Republic cover story. Shut up, Senator Biden, because Senator Biden has just been a motor mouth and a bloviator. He's never been particularly smart. He's never been popular, right? He lucked into being able to run from Delaware, this tiny state. And the idea that he's ever had, impressive, important, interesting, profound things to say is ridiculous. And yet, the best Biden ever is an incredibly low level to meet.
The first time he ran, that's a different brain processing than Joe Biden, diarrhea of the mouth.
I think this may be where we disagree. I mean, Joe Biden's always been Joe Biden. Joe Biden's always said crazy things. You go back to the 1987 campaign. You go back to, you go back and you look at what happened in 2007, 2008.
But that's speaking inartfully. Like when he said that Barack Obama was clean and articulate. That's inartful. That's different. I mean, again, you and I both, public speaking, we're live all the time. We could make a mistake. But you don't look at that video and see the look in his eyes and hear him say, I'm running for Senate, vote for the other Biden. You don't see that as...
Right, a normal person sees that and realizes this guy's senile, he's checked out, and the notion that he could become the commander-in-chief is just repellent, right? But Joe Scarborough doesn't see what he doesn't want to see.
As I did then and do now, as part of the decline, or do you?
I mean, I don't know. I'm not. This is the sort of thing. There are a couple of things like this that we agree on so many things. There are a couple of things that we disagree on, and one is the Congresswoman who.
Well, the big one is that by 2017, Mark Halperin saw that, thank God, Joe Biden's life in public was over because he was a senile, pathetic old man. And Joe Scarborough into 2024, 7 years later, was saying, "Oh, best Biden ever," as though that means something.
Passed away that he mentioned that I'm sure we'll be looking at too, where I look at that as being Joe Biden getting up there, getting flustered, and he's had in his recording, sort of recording in his brain since he was since he was 29. I'm Joe Biden. I'm running for Senate, and I'd love your vote. I think also, Mark, and you mentioned this before, we've both gotten up and spoken. I've unfortunately spent 30 years talking way too much. And, there'll be times I will say Mitterrand. Mitterrand and Trump just don't get along.
This guy just wants to deflect. Right. The more he talks, the more he shows how uncomfortable he is with the truth. He is so uncomfortable with reality. He is living his life in denial of reality. Right? He is coming across as a pathetic old fool himself.
And, it'll be like during the break where Alex will get in my ear.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Right. What Joe Scarborough is claiming is ridiculous.
Alex will get in my ear and say it's Macron, not Mitterrand. But you think that clip is
this is where you make me mental. That clip, to me, there's a through line from that clip to the
right. People who accept reality are going to feel mental if they're such a good friend is just so in denial of reality. Right? Most of us could not put up with this level of just reality denial from a close friend.
The debate in 2024. He's losing it when he's having a bad night.
Right. Anyone who says that they were shocked or surprised at Joe Biden's debate performance has been living in denial of reality. Right. Conservatives, anyone who was not on the left, recognized well before 2020, if they paid any attention at all to public life, that Joe Biden much of the time was senile.
His brain is not firing. It's not what happens when we say Mitterrand instead of Kohl. Right. His brain, that's how I perceive that. Okay.
So let me ask you, though, because this happens with other politicians. We've seen other politicians do this before, and this is not whataboutism, but when Donald Trump talked constantly about World War II and when he talked about all the other crazy things.
Donald Trump, who's so incredibly active, who puts on a command performance, who can riff for 90 minutes to a crowded stadium. There's just absolutely no comparison. To try to compare the malapropisms of Donald Trump and Joe Biden and say that they reflect the same level of mental acuity is absurd.
He talked about during the campaign.
Mixed up Nancy Pelosi and
Nancy Pelosi and Nancy Mace or whomever.
No, it was Nikki Haley. It was Nikki
Haley, exactly. Yeah. I think they're both from South Carolina. But yeah, I mean, I've seen that a good bit, especially in older politicians. And I think for me, the question is, does that impact his governing or not? This is a great mystery for me, Mark, and maybe you can help answer this. So you see a through line that through 24. That to me is like bumbling Joe Biden that I've seen for a very long time. But when did you first notice this decline? Do you trace it back to 2017?
That book event I went to 2017, where I turned to my wife after the event and I said, "Thank goodness he'll never run for anything again." And how could his family let him do this book tour? And again, to me, this is why I get so frustrated. As much as we agree about this, to me, it's just obvious through line. What I saw in 2017. What I see in that South Carolina event, what I see when he addresses...
Right, it's obvious to anyone who doesn't have a faith commitment to denying reality. Unless you have a strong, overwhelming emotional need to deny reality, right, you would have the same sort of observations as Mark Halperin here.
The dead woman, Congresswoman from Indiana, which we'll play in a second. I see the through line of the bad days are increasing, and the bad days, you wouldn't want a CEO or a president having a bad day at a time of crisis. Let's play. You and I have thought about this a million times. 104, Joe Biden at an event in part honoring a dead congresswoman from Indiana talks to her.
Because I believe we can use these advances to do even more to make America stronger and a healthier nation. And so many of you know so much about this as well, and you're committed. And I want to thank all of you here for including bipartisan elected officials like Representative Governor, Senator Braun, Senator Booker, Representative Jackie. Are you here? Where's Jackie? I didn't think she was going to be here to help make this a reality.
Again, you and I talked about this so much. I know you think I over-rely on the example, but that is not Mitterrand or saying Mitterrand instead of Kohl. That is talking to a dead person whose the event was on her behalf. How can that not be like a signature signal moment where the country and the media said there's a big problem?
Yeah, I mean, that's a concern, and it was reported on, I'm sure. So what would you have, at that point, do you pull up the stakes and say because he did that, get out of the race?
There are 100 different videos where it's obvious that Joe Biden was mentally checked out, was a senile old man incapable of doing the job.
It's up to him, but it was asked about at the White House briefing. And the White House press secretary said the reason Joe Biden talked to a dead congresswoman was because it was top of mind for him. She was top of mind. Again, this is not a joke, and it's not about the 2024 election. It's about the commander in chief. We had no access to his doctor. Mm-hmm. And again, you want to bring up Donald Trump confusing people, it's fine. But right now we're talking about Joe Biden. I just look at that and say, like, if that were my dad, in a public role, and he started talking to a dead congresswoman, I would take him for some emergency tests. I just don't understand how you look at that and have a reaction of, confused.
I think.
And the guy had years of steadily growing prostate cancer. I mean, just the level of denial of reality and recklessness for their sheer ambition by the Bidens, absolutely sickening. And those people like Joe Scarborough who defended and deflected and just denied. No wonder people have so much contempt for him.
I think that maybe the reason I look at it that way is because, again, everything is context. And you say, oh, well, don't bring up Donald Trump. That's in context and what was also going on at the same time. The people whose heads were blowing up about Joe Biden were completely fine with Donald Trump. I think the other thing, though, my personal context on.
So you can look at academic analysis, and I found dozens of academics who are very happy to say that Donald Trump is obviously physically, cognitively unfit for public office. I couldn't find any academics prior to the, June 27, 2024 debate who noted the bleeding obvious since 2017 that Joe Biden was unfit for public office. Instead, I find academic after academic, doctor after doctor, academic doctor after academic doctor putting out academic essays saying that Joe Biden is obviously fit for office when he was obviously unfit for office. I could not find one academic who noted prior to that 2024 debate that Joe Biden was obviously unfit for office. Instead, they were just pushing lie after lie, that Biden was fit and Trump was not.
It is that, I don't know exactly when that was, but I'm sure I talked to him. I'm sure I'd been in the White House. I'm sure
that was
2023. I mean, there was an ongoing conversation either between myself and the president, myself and people around him. And I think if I had ever had a conversation with him where I had that concern, then
I don't believe this for a second. He heard what he wanted to hear. All right. Have you ever met a woman who is as dumb as a rock and simultaneously as hot as fuck? And you want to bang her and you want to date her. And so you just live in denial that she's as dumb as a rock because she's hot as fuck. Right? Joe Scarborough is as deluded as that man that I just referenced. Right? There are a lot of women there who are dumb as rocks and hot as fuck. And being hot doesn't make you smart.
And that would have been far more telling to me. But again, though, no doubt that's a bad day at the office, no doubt about it.
All right. Again, I'll say respectfully, to me, it's worse than a bad day in an office. It's just seminal. All right, let's talk about you.
To call what Joe Biden did at this memorial for a dead congresswoman as a bad day at the office makes Joe Scarborough rightly an object of ridicule. How do you know that you're living in reality? You're not getting humiliated. As soon as you operate in denial of reality, you will get humiliated. This is why Joe Scarborough is consistently getting humiliated because of the degree of his denial of reality.
And your famous argument in 2024, before the debate, about saying best Biden ever, this gets a lot of attention. I want to walk through it carefully. Set up the context of this. You mentioned on your show in the soundbite that you'd met with Biden, but just talk a little bit more about the meeting.
Well, and again, it's not just that meeting. I remember writing an op-ed in the Washington Post.
The wider context of your contact with him.
Yeah, the wider context. And I remember early on, no, actually, it wasn't Afghanistan, it was Ukraine. And I wrote a Washington Post op-ed that said, Joe Biden needs to stop telling Vladimir Putin what he's not going to do. Joe Biden needs to start telling, Vladimir Putin what he is going to do, or just keep his mouth shut, basically. And went through all the reasons why being overly cautious on the issue of Ukraine was not serving our interests, because we needed to keep Putin guessing a bit more than that. Got a call late at night. As you know, Meek and I go to sleep pretty early because of our early wake-up call. Got a call late at night. And there's about a 30, 45-minute pretty one-sided discussion from the President of the United States, being critical.
So one way of understanding humility is simply living in reality. If you don't live in reality, if you refuse to accept reality, if you make war on reality, you will get humiliated. Sycax makes this point.
Giving you feedback that you need to pay attention to a particular aspect of your life, because pain is a signal that your model of reality is incorrect. And pain is your opportunity to bring that model into closer conformity with the way things really are. If you can alter your relationship with pain, you will accelerate your self-development 100-fold. So what prevents people from using the opportunity inherent in pain? Well, there are many potential obstructions, but 3 principal ones. The first principal obstruction is that some people are so stubborn or arrogant or ideologically possessed that they double down on their incorrect version of reality. They continue
All right, this is Joe Scarborough.
to believe that they're right despite their pain. They hold on to the belief that the way they think things should be is how reality should, in fact, operate. So arrogance and ideological possession can prevent people from entering into this opportunity. I'm Dr. Orion Terry.
Yeah, pain, all right, pain, humiliation, that will teach you that you are out of touch with reality.
But more importantly, going in depth as to why he was doing what he was doing and taking me through it. And, you know, Mark, you and I have talked to politicians. And I think this is a very important point for people that are listening and maybe skeptical, but maybe open-minded about this. You and I have talked to a lot of politicians, and I'm going to be really blunt. Most politicians that call up and lecture me or lecture you about something we've written or said, we sit there and we're very polite, but rolling our eyes because, you know, they're usually going, yeah.
Yeah, but Joe Biden, right? I've never heard a wise, you know, profound, smart Joe Biden, but Joe Scarborough is about to tell us about the wise, best Joe Biden ever he heard.
They're talking, they're doing their talking points. And again, you're in an interesting position. I'm not going to debate a presidential candidate or a politician when they're calling me up, complaining about something that I've done on the air. I go, thank you very much. I appreciate your input. But usually I hang up the phone and make somebody who's that, and I'll be like, oh, that was fill in the blank. Oh my God. On his talking points. It was pretty embarrassing. I didn't get that with Biden. In fact, when I finished talking to Biden on I guess it was late 22, I hung up the phone and I said to Mika, I go, he doesn't have dementia. Whoa. Because again, it was not just cogent. It was a better, really, analysis of the situation than I'd heard from most people, unless it was.
Right. It was the best analysis of the situation that he heard from anyone. Give me a break. I have never heard Joe Biden give a better description of a reality than anyone else. The notion is absurd.
Let's say it was Chairman McCall or somebody running a pertinent committee.
And you're confident if someone heard the audio of that conversation, they would come away with the same conclusion.
Oh my God.
No, they wouldn't. Right? At least someone who lives in a delusional fantasy land would make such a fool of himself as Joe Scarborough keeps doing.
Yeah. Anybody. Yeah. And then
give me one example of Joe Biden coming off as knowing a topic like Afghanistan better than anybody else. I defy you. Give me one single example of Joe Biden speaking extemporaneously and showing that he is a greater master of a particular topic than anyone else, or even that he's in the top 10%.
There were other calls. There also it's not a secret. Mike Barnacle is a good friend of ours and a friend of Joe Biden's, and talk to him regularly, probably weekly. I'd always talk to Mike. And again, there's no grand conspiracy. I'd say, how's he doing? How's his energy level? How's his, did he seem cogent? Did he seem off? Because you're reading the reports in the paper. And again, and there were about 5 people like that we were, and I would talk to you about this too. If somebody,
5 people like that, and they just told him Joe Biden's just fine. He's energetic. He's doing cartwheels. We can't keep up with him, right? And Joe Scarborough buys into this nonsense, which is why he looks like such a fool.
He had a concern. I would call you up and said, "Hey, I've got so and so saw him in the White House and was concerned." So that there were a lot of those meetings. There was, again, this 2.5, 3 hour meeting that I had with him. I think it was March, may have been March of 2024.
Yeah.
And we went in, it was supposed to be like an hour lunch, which is not unusual. I've done it with Donald Trump and been in with Barack Obama. We go in, pretty regularly.
So Joe Scarborough talks about the reason people tune into Morning Joe is to hear his opinions. Now, I've tuned into Morning Joe. I don't know, I probably listened to about 20 hours of Morning Joe, and I couldn't give a toss for Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski's opinions. To me, they are detriments to the show. Right? I tune in because sometimes there are quite smart, intelligent guests who are speaking. Right? It's like the time I was sitting in shul and the rabbi got up and started talking about why we chose him to be our spiritual leader. I didn't choose him to be my spiritual leader. It was just a shul that was convenient for me for all sorts of reasons, had absolutely nothing to do with the rabbi, and this notion that he was my spiritual leader was a delusion. Right? People will tune into Morning Joe for the combination of guests. Right? I've never, ever heard someone say, I wonder what Joe Scarborough, or I wonder what Mika Brzezinski has to say about this or that.
But
to the extent that they are interesting is because they are connected, right? They are moving in elite circles. They do have an elite audience, and so they are in touch with a lot of elite people who sometimes tell them really smart things. And to the extent that Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski repeat really smart things that other people tell them, then, yeah, they might have some contributions to make.
When I had him there, I was asking him, I wasn't asking him about the campaign. I was asking him about Ukraine. I was asking about Israel. I was asking about India, which
I've never been impressed by Joe Scarborough and his questions. He's not some great interviewer. He's not some great intellect.
I think was in the news recently. Basically took him around the world. I asked him about, our flex in Asia, what was going on in Guam, what was going on in the Philippines, what was going on with Australia, what was going on in South Korea and Japan talking. And he took me.
This pompous old fool taking the president around the world with his vast, wellspring of knowledge about how the world works.
He really took me around the world, and I will say,
look, just because you can speak very rapidly, and you know how to play the game, and Joe Scarborough knows how to play the game. All right, he aligns his views with those that advance his career. Right, he's good at playing the game, and he's good at speaking rapidly. I don't ever recall hearing wisdom from Joe Scarborough.
If you and I lined up 100 Washington politicians, he handled those answers better than 99% of them. Ironically, this will be a surprise to people. The one person that I talked to in the 2024 cycle who had as impressive a grasp was Ron DeSantis, who for some reason didn't want to show that during the campaign, but talked to Ron.
So, question in the chat: what inspired 40 to use the tagline "Your moral leader"? So, sometime around year 2000, someone was imitating my voice, and they were posting on nvbrothels.com, and interspersed with all these reviews of various Nevada hookers was someone carrying on about how I want to be your moral leader in imitation of how I would write and speak. And I was just so struck by it, just like I still use the tagline on my Twitter, right, from this ludicrous Reform rabbi who said to Richard Spencer, my tradition teaches a message of radical inclusion and love. Will you sit down and learn Torah with me and learn love? Right? Such a ludicrous statement. And then this bloke, like imitating my voice, mocking me, going around NV brothels, posting about how I want to be your moral leader. It was classic.
Ron DeSantis several times on foreign policy, and he was one of these guys that I talked to. I go, wow, okay. So I went away from a 3-hour meeting with Biden talking about everything from, Bill Burns negotiating, in Russia. Is he going to negotiate in Russia? And talking about the West Bank and what he was doing as far as illegal settlements in the West Bank, how in relationship with Netanyahu. And I went away from there feeling extraordinarily confident. The guy was cogent and beyond cogent, that he actually more than, again, except for maybe chairman or chairwomen of the relevant committees on Capitol Hill, a better grasp on foreign policy than most anybody.
All right. He thought that Joe Biden had a better grasp on foreign policy than almost anybody. All right, show me any extemporaneous thinking, any extemporaneous talking by Joe Biden that would lead one to that conclusion. It is ludicrous, right? Just absolutely nonsensical. How on earth could you make such a claim? There is no reality behind it.
This is America's Late News, Fox News at Night. And breaking tonight, you are looking live at Capitol Hill, where any moment members of Congress could vote on the so-called Big Beautiful Bill. The very latest on the timing and the outcome in moments. Plus this.
Excuse me, turn the lights down. Turn the lights down. These are burial sites right here. Burial sites. Over 1,000 of white farmers. Those people were all killed.
President Trump allowing the diplomatic sausage to be made live on national television in the Oval Office, showing the president of South Africa a video that President Trump claims is proof of white genocide.
Incredibly brave of Donald Trump to make the claim that white people's lives matter too, that white farmers' lives in South Africa matter too, right? The South African law enforcement does very little, next to nothing, to protect white people, to protect white farmers. It's open season on them, so they've had to band together in their own collective defense, but thousands of them have been slaughtered. And incredibly brave against all elite opinion for Donald Trump to take action on their behalf.
And then an NBC reporter made the mistake of trying to change the subject. Stay tuned for that. And the cable lefties going head-to-head. CNN's Jake Tapper telling MSNBC's Joe Scarborough that President Biden played him like a fiddle when it came to covering up his cognitive decline.
Joe Biden said to staffers that he wanted to convince you that you were wrong. And he focused on you like you were a constituency, like you were farmers in Iowa, like you were the Kiwanis Club in New Hampshire. And he made sure that you...
And Joe Scarborough bought into it because it felt so good to have the President of the United States, a doddering, often senile fool, like paying attention and courting him.
Farmer Joe.
More on that in moments, but we begin with the breaking news on the Big Beautiful Bill. The senior congressional correspondent Chad Pergram is live for us on Capitol Hill with the status of the House vote. Video allegedly showing the grave treatment of white farmers. Mark Meredith live in D.C. with more on...
There's nothing allegedly about them. Hundreds, thousands of them have been slaughtered.
That story. Mark, good evening.
Trace, good evening to you. President Trump accused the president of South Africa, who was sitting right next to him in the Oval Office, of covering up what Trump claims is a genocide of white South African citizens. This meeting, which was tense at times, was all captured on camera with dozens of reporters also in the room. Trump says the South African government is seizing land from white farmers, enforcing anti-white policies, and embracing anti-American policies.
You're taking people's land away.
We have not.
From them. And those people, in many cases, are being executed. They're being executed. And they happen to be white, and most of them happen to be farmers. Mm-hmm. And that's a tough situation. I don't know how you explain that.
The South African government recently enacted a law allowing the government to seize land from any private owner, white or otherwise, for public purposes similar to eminent domain in this country. President Ramaphosa denied there's any genocide taking place in his country.
I would say if there was Afrikaner farmer genocide, I can bet you these three gentlemen would not be here, including my Minister of Agriculture. He would not be with me. So it'll take him, President Trump, listening to their stories, to their perspective.
Also in the room today, there in the Oval Office, was Elon Musk, Trump's billionaire friend and advisor, who is also from South Africa. But Musk did not talk to reporters while the meeting was underway, while cameras were there. And Trace, I want to mention at this hour, we are also following some breaking news not far from our Washington Bureau here, that there was a shooting tonight around 9:30 where we know at least two people were killed, an adult man and an adult woman. The reason that we believe this is going to be notable is because of this news conference that's going to be getting underway. These are live pictures outside Metro PD headquarters. There's a belief that this may have involved some Israeli embassy staffers. We don't know if they were the ones who were either hurt or may have been killed in the shooting because we...
Okay, I want to get back to Joe Scarborough. Just to show the humiliation that happens when you live in a war with reality.
All right, so here's now what you said in the wake of that meeting. This is 105, please, on Morning Joe.
As I've said here on the show over the past couple of weeks, I've spent a good bit of time with Joe Biden. I've spent couple of hours with Joe Biden sitting, talking, going around the world as far as talking issues, talking the economy, talking inflation. He's cogent. But I undersold him when I said he was cogent. He's far beyond cogent. In fact, I think he's better than he's ever been intellectually, analytically, because he's been around for 50 years. And, you know, I don't know if people know this or not. Biden used to be a hothead. Sometimes that Irishman would get in front of their reasoning. Sometimes he would say things he didn't want to say. This is, and I don't really, you know what? I don't really care. Start your tape right now, because I'm about to tell you the truth. And F you if you can't handle the truth. This version of Biden, intellectually, analytically, is the best Biden ever.
Okay, so a lot to unpack there.
Mark, you have to explain to everybody, like, that's actually the first time I've seen the clip all the way through. And you were the one, 6 months later to alert me to the fact that this had gone viral.
Yeah, well, as I told you, and people may not realize, you don't pay much attention to social media anymore. You don't pay much attention to criticism. But I told you for several months, I said, Joe, Biden ever has become the symbol for the right of the media and MSNBC having so much Trump derangement syndrome that you're.
So, do you believe that Joe Scarborough doesn't pay attention to criticism? Do you really believe that he doesn't pay attention to social media? Do you believe that he is anything like what these two people just try to present him as? I do not believe that.
You're claiming that a guy who's clearly lost mental acuity is the best Biden ever. Now, I say to people, go watch the State of the Union address. Talk to people who talked to Joe Biden. He had good days and bad days. You were with him on a good day and had conversations with him on a good day. But
on good days.
Good days. Yeah. Looking back at that, do you say, well, it was misleading to say best Biden ever without caveating it and say, except on the days when he's not the best Biden ever?
Well, but I never saw those days personally.
Well, you did because you saw him address a dead congresswoman, and you saw him in South Carolina.
A dead congresswoman, yeah.
Yeah, well, more than that. I can show you the RNC clip reels. There were plenty of days in public when he was not the best Biden ever. And of course,
he stumbled and bumbled around, Mark. I mean, yeah, he certainly did. Donald Trump did. Other politicians did. But it's actually the same case as a lot of times when I've gone in and talked to Donald Trump. We've gone to Donald Trump, and I've heard the media narrative around Donald Trump, and certainly I've been very critical of Donald Trump. And when I leave, I have a better understanding, just like Jeffrey Goldberg did a couple of weeks ago, I have a better understanding of where Donald Trump.
Seriously? You seriously want to compare Donald Trump's vigor, right? Donald Trump's cognitive capacity. When Mark Halperin talks about Donald Trump having a huge bandwidth, right, that's another indicator of Donald Trump's high intelligence. And you seriously want to compare that to Joe Biden's frequent bouts of senility? Give me a break.
Is mentally, if Donald Trump is losing it, like people have said through the years or not. And so again, am I going to look at a clip that's going viral?
Right, this is so obviously in denial. You can see the circuitous way that he speaks. Right, this is not from the heart. Right, this is not something that's fair dinkum. Right, this is a performance trying to present himself in the best way possible. He is so feeling ill at ease with reality, and so he just talks nonsense.
And pay more attention to that than 2.5, 3 hours I had with a guy one-on-one going around the world. No, I'm just not going to. Are some of the clips bad? Yeah, they certainly are bad. I can understand why people would see that.
They're not bad because you're a motor mouth. No one ever looked to you for wisdom. You're in a genre where you simply talk very rapidly, right? So they're not embarrassing because no one who is wise has any expectations for you, right? You're a motor mouthful like Ben Shapiro. You're just a Ben Shapiro of the left.
That without the context and say that there was a problem with that, especially because I said start rolling your tape right here. It's like, but when I look at that tape, based on what I saw with Biden, based on the time that I spent with Biden, based on the hundreds of hours that I talked to people who talked to Biden.
It's absolutely unbearable to be around people with this level of denial of reality. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.